everyone. I will start by introducing myself, and my name is Hala ARCHIDES. I'm a full-time senior lecturer at ARCHIDES, the Faculty of Architecture and Design at Azam University, Tripoli, Lebanon. And I would like to welcome you all to our very first online live public lecture of this year. Despite all the hardships and weirdness that this year has presented, we are lucky enough to be able to proceed with this lecture series. And we have the pleasure in hosting Mr. Wael Al-Awar for our first lecture this evening. Mr. Wael, Wael has graduated from my alma mater, the American University of Beirut, AUB, and has grown to become a well-known architect recognized locally, regionally, and internationally by his built and awarded projects. Wael moved on from AUB to practice architecture internationally prior to founding his own firm, IBDA, the Arabic word for start. Wael took a literal turn with his firm and indeed started to make a difference and leave a print in the discipline of built architecture. Wael started to question and gently revolt against the traditional practices of architecture. For example, I can refer to his award-winning mosque Al-Warqa in Dubai in 2016, in which he transformed the concept of a conventional mosque from a mere building for prayer into a place for prayer. Operating both in Dubai and in Tokyo, Wael and his Japanese partners at YY, formerly IBDA, are trying to push the boundaries of traditional design and challenge the existing status quo through an interdisciplinary design approach with a focus on the natural phenomena. Recently, they have been appointed as the curators for the National Pavilion of the United Arab Emirates at the Venice Architecture Biennale 2021, How Will We Live Together? And their participation explores how the salt compounds found in the United Arab Emirates, the salt slab, could stir renewable building materials. And this is just another dimension of innovation that Wael is invested in exploring. His talk tonight, entitled Future Vernacular, will be focusing on the importance of environmental awareness versus the thirst for newness. He aims to propose a new that explores the localness as a means to restore the environmental imbalances and to preserve cultural identities. Well, on behalf of ARCHIDES and Azam University, I would like to express our gratitude for your contribution and are looking forward to a no doubt enriching presentation. But before we start, I would just like to confirm to the audience the Q&A session at the end of your presentation, dear Wael, via the chat option. So you may be texting while during the talk, and we will try as much as possible to pass on your questions at the end of the lecture, or maybe during the talk. We will see how will that be going. It depends on the flow of the talk itself. So once again, thank you for being with us here. And without any further ado, the floor, actually the online platform is all yours, dear Wael. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alas. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Azam University, for inviting me and Dean Abid to present some of our works and some of my works here to the people attending right now. So I'll start to share my PowerPoint. Yes. So I believe now it is hopefully shared.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, YY. What does YY mean? Actually, YY is a Japanese word. It's an onomatopoeia. So it's the sound of a cheering crowd. And after 10 years of starting, we thought we had enough content to create some noise. So we rebranded our name to YY. It's in pre-COVID days, actually, you know, as an architect, I used to travel extensively. I used to travel at least 3 times a month, averaging about 50 flights a year, which was environmentally disastrous as well as physically draining in many ways. But today, I think, you know, we are able to do a lot of what we used to do through simple online platforms like today. And this is a screenshot actually from a recording, from a conversation we had regular conversations we have with all the different pavilions for the Venice Biennale 2020-2021. In principle, I have different design approaches and principles. There are mainly 6. First is the cultural and contextual sensitivities. That's something very important and always shows in the work I do. The second thing is my interest in phenomena. I'm very interested in natural light, wind, activity, time. Also, I'm very interested in the synthesis between architecture and landscape. Fourth, the architecture beyond functionality and program. I call it the folly. So it is, you know, the architecture itself as a space rather than something that is meeting programmatic requirements. Fifth is the diagram of relations, not diagram of form. And this is an interesting point. If you are familiar with my work and see some of my work on Instagram or our website, you will see that we're more interested in relationships of certain things rather than form. Form is a derivative of relations. I'll explain that more in the lecture during the talk. And 6 is the vernacular future, which I will focus on today during the presentation. So in this vernacular future, it's more about sustainability, constructability, ecological material sourcing, and it's, I think, very relevant to our time and day to day. So in pre-modern days, architecture, I believe, was produced from nature by man. And then in modern days, architecture became produced by technology, and the architect has a strong will, had a strong intention in producing the architecture. But I think in 1967, there was a big realization in the world, and that is actually the first picture of Earth that was caught by a rocket that went to outer space. And we realized that our planet is finite. So there is a finite boundary to our planet and the world we live on. So everything is there on that planet that you see in front of you. And all of, you know, our realization of climate and climate, you know, this climate change is real. It's no longer a myth. In the past, a lot used to argue that you know, the climate crisis is not a real crisis, but it is a fact today. We can track it, we can see it. We can see our snows melting, our glaciers diminishing, and we can see through scientific readings the temperatures rising. You know, it's very important to know, to understand where are we going, and you know, and I think Hashim Sarkis for the Venice Biennale, his question, how we will live together, is also something that is very important to address as architects and designers. And where are we going from today, 2020, to the future? Speculations say that in 2050, the population will increase by 2.1 billion. So that means that we will have to double what we have built today in order to meet the demands of the 2050 population growth. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2019, they state that we will have to build an equivalent of New York City every month over 40 years in order to meet the demand of the 2050 plus 2.1 billion population. So here, our challenge as architects, as innovators, as researchers, is to come up with innovative ideas and ways in order to build for this demand. Knowing that climate, you know, the climate is in serious threat and that we cannot keep on going the way we are going. So, you know, it's important to note that the construction industry and building material have, you know, a tremendous impact on the climate and climate change. The construction industry is responsible for 40% of global pollution, and that is a fact. That is not a myth. Today, you know, we still use the same construction methods that we used to use 100 years ago. There's not much innovation that the industry has gone through in the past 100 years, and still we consume or we build in the same methods and the same ways that we used to build 100 years ago. And the reason that I'm saying that is us understanding the responsibility of the materials that we use in our construction and in architecture today. So my interest was in trying to really understand that if we want to make a change, we need to address we need to address the root of the problem rather than find ways of just going around the problem. Today, we have to understand that cement is one of the key materials that is responsible for climate change and responsible for the climate crisis we are facing. Cement produces 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. It is very important to also note that concrete is actually the second most consumed resource on Earth after water. So that tells you a lot about us as, you know, humans and our thirst for building with cement especially. And actually, it's important to note that the fact of this 8% CO2 emission comes from converting limestone, CaCO3, to CaCO lime, which is the binder in cement, and that actually releases CO2 into the atmosphere. It is not about energy required to produce the cement itself, but it's more of a chemical reaction that takes place in the process. It's very important to also note that and understand that 1 ton of cement, 40 bags of cement, which can build approximately a column. You know, I assume a lot of the people attending the lecture today are architects and understand 1 ton of cement is nothing, cannot, you know, in terms of building, and that produces 1 ton of CO2. So the ratio of cement to CO2 emission is actually 1:1, which is something that is ridiculous in terms of material today. I mean, if it was invented today, maybe no governing body would accept a 1:1 ratio of 1 ton of cement will produce 1 ton of CO2 emission, which means that will need 40 years for one tree to absorb that 1 ton of CO2. This is a photo of one of the largest constructions in China. It's a dam built in cement. And I show this because it's important to note that that most of the cement is not only used in architecture, but also in infrastructure and engineering. So it's not only for looking at the problem from a building perspective, but an infrastructural perspective. So the other point we move to is extraction, so which is resource depletion. So the construction industry is also responsible for 40% of global resource consumption. So we consume from the earth, we deplete its resources by 40%. So that also has a lot to say in our responsibility towards the climate. And then third is energy. So again, the construction industry is responsible for 36% of the world's energy use. And from that 36%, actually 86% is from fossil fuels. It's not from renewable energy or any form of green energy, but it is purely by fossil fuel energy. And then the fourth is excess, which is waste production. So also globally, the construction industry produces 35% of waste. So, you know, that takes us to a very simple kind of summary of the points, which is in pollution, resource depletion, energy, and waste. So it's a 40% across all fields. So what that tells us is that, you know, it is not at all enough to change our daily habits to make a change. This is not going to make a change. You know, a fundamental change in the industry is necessary. And you know, when they let you believe that recycling a can of Pepsi that you drink is going to make a change, the science, if you look into it, does not really add up. And bigger fundamental changes have to take place. So then that poses the question, is that what is our responsibility? My responsibility as a 21st century architect. This is a very interesting article, actually, that was on Domus a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if anyone read it, and it was actually a letter that Jack Herzog wrote to David Chipperfield, in which he is answering the question about the responsibility of the architect in the environmental catastrophe, in social inequality, in poverty, in degradation of the planet's resources, etc., etc. And he clearly writes that, dear David, the answer is nothing. And that is unfortunately a response from Jacques Herzog to David Chipperfield. I show this slide because this is, I believe, these are the 20th century architects. These are the modern architects. So, and you can see here why I like to show this slide is that it shows you people like Arata Isozaki, Zaha Hadid, you know, Rem Koolhaas is there, Frank Gehry. So these people are from so many different cultural backgrounds and so many different parts of the world, yet they choose to all wear the same suit, with Isozaki with a slight change in the tie, you know, kind of critical regionalism, just a very small adaptation, yet still in a very modern attire. While, you know, I jump back to the book by Bernard Radowski and actually this was an exhibit at the MoMA in the 60s, I believe, and it was architecture without architects, or the vernacular architecture. And it shows you that how we used to build cities and we used to build architecture that was so smart and that was so ecologically sustainable that it didn't need the modern man or the modern genius to teach a society or a culture or a group of people to understand their context and their climate. For example, you know, I show this is in Dubai, I mean, where you can clearly see this is not a modern building or a modern architecture, but this was an architecture produced by a people that understood their climate and they understood their region. You know, I am from Lebanon. I worked in Japan for many years, and today I also work between Japan and the UAE, and I live in the UAE, and it shows maybe 50 years ago how these three different cultures have so many differences between them. And maybe Lebanon is the one that has lost its traditional character most, I believe, because in the UAE you still have a strong sense of tradition that is caught up even with the dress or the attire, and even in Japan also. And they still maybe have a stronger cultural rooting to their identity. And this, you can see the architecture that was produced in the UAE. It was an architecture built from corals. So they actually found material found in their environment, and they used to build with that material. Is it ecologically sustainable today? Of course not. But at that time, when the population was so small, it was probably something that they could afford to do. This is another interesting vernacular architecture, and this is actually in Siwa. It's on the border between Libya and Egypt, and you can see here the whole village or town of Siwa is built from salt blocks that are extracted from a sabkha, which are salt flats, it's the Arabic word, that is in the environment in Siwa. So they have these very rich salt flats and salt lakes, and they extract these salt blocks and build with them the buildings of their day. And here you can see how the whole city is built, and this is about 800 years old. Actually, it's quite old. And I just like to show this slide because the Star Wars, the first time it was shot, actually was shot on a sabkha, and they did in Tunisia show Chateau Jurid, which is also an area where the architecture was built from these salt flats in Tunisia. So why I show these is that, you know, there was a clear lineage or a clear connection to the environment of the UAE. The UAE is actually 5% of the land area is made from sabkhas. So if we are trying to solve the problem of cement and the problem of concrete, which is mainly a problem that is derived from minerals or from the geography or geology, because it is obviously a problem of limestone conversion to lime, means we have to understand our geology and our geography and try to find solutions that can replace the limestone and the lime in new methods or in new formats. And 5% of a land area being a sabkha or a wetland is actually a huge land area that should be acknowledged. So you start, this is a photo I took in Liwa in Abu Dhabi that shows you these beautiful salt lakes that, you know, are hundreds of years old actually and crystallize due to the high temperatures, of course, in the desert, but also due to the water table levels underground that are very close to the surface because of, you know, the geography is so flat. So it means the underground water table is always so high, and this due to very high heat, it creates this evaporation process and creates these salt lakes. It's also yes.
Sorry, may I just ask concerning, you were talking about those this Siwa area.
Yes.
They were building with which material exactly? They were building with those, they were making already blocks with the available material, with the salt, they were using it as such.
Right, it's their vernacular architecture. So you can see in the image here on the right, they are just extracting these blocks from the salt flat as it is. So they just cut them out as bricks. So these are salt blocks actually. And they use them as bricks. So, and then they just stack them to create their buildings. And it is interesting because a block against another block and the binder, what they will put in between is actually the water or the mud from the salt lake. So it actually crystallizes. So it's a crystal formation, just like concrete. I mean, concrete is a crystallizing formation, yeah? So it crystallizes and creates a wall structure. So this is a monocoque wall structure system. So it becomes, again, it becomes a strong, very, let's say, resistant material, just due to the fact of one block crystallizing with another block and uniting. So the crystals unite with one another.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, and it's interesting to note that actually the UAE Sabkha in 2018 was listed on the UNESCO tentative list of World Heritage Sites, and that one square meter of a Sabkha can actually sequester more CO2 than 1 square meter of rainforest. So these geographies are actually living geographies. They are living environments that can absorb CO2. So they are natural sinks or carbon sinks. So they help the environment. They help to stabilize and create kind of equilibrium in the system itself. Similarly, the Arabian Sea is a natural sink. So any sea or water body is actually a natural sink. And these are things that we have to preserve, and we have to make sure we protect, as they are our warriors against CO2 emission. They are the ones that absorb the CO2 from the climate. But what's happening in the UAE is actually the Sabkhas and the Arabian Sea are actually under huge threat currently due to the desalination process. Since we are in the GCC, these are desert environments that have no groundwater. They have no fresh water. So the only way to produce water and to survive is through desalinating. Desalination process does consume a lot of energy, but today with the technology, it's no longer so draining of energy. So that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that once you take water out from the sea and you produce fresh water, you have a waste brine. It's like a residual brine that gets thrown back into the sea. And today there is every day, actually, the UAE throws back into the sea the equivalent of 4,800 Olympic swimming pools of this waste brine. So what's happening is that the MENA region, including KSA and Kuwait, Qatar, and the other Gulf countries, they are responsible for 48% of global desalination. The KSA, with a population of 33 million, USA is actually the second most, the second largest desalinator, but they have a population of 328 million. And the UAE is the third largest desalinator with a population of 9.5 million. So, the equivalent or the ratio is very off. And the rest of the world is responsible for 52% of the remaining desalination. So this residual brine, due to these huge desalination plants, are producing a material that's being thrown back into the sea and is actually very harmful to our environment. And due to this process, the UAE is always ranking in the top 5 countries in CO2 emission per capita, of course. So compared to Saudi Arabia, United States, much larger populations, much bigger economies, it still beats them in the CO2 emission per capita. So just to sum this up, so to go back to the title of this lecture or this presentation, is that what is future vernacular in this process? It might be the industrial waste. In the past, as we said, the vernacular was materials found in nature. We understand today that you can no longer consume that material found in nature. It's no longer sustainable to build with corals in the GCC. That is unacceptable because we will deplete all the corals with a population expected to increase by plus 2.1 billion by 2050. So we have to find new ways of creating material and using our material, and more than just simply recycling, but actually creating new ways of looking at material. So we were interested in that residual brine of the desalination water, this material that's being thrown back into the sea, and we thought, okay, why can't we see if we are able to produce architecture from that material? And that would then probably be a huge help to the environment and solve also the problem of the concrete and its CO2 emissions. So the first experiments, actually, we started by, if you can see the photo on the right, very simple experiments, was by actually submerging fabrics into the wastewater brine solution and letting it crystallize. So the simple process of growing crystals on fabric, a fabric that is something that works in tension, starts to work in compression. So we started this research with volunteers and students, as well as the people from our office participating. So it was kind of a collaborative process. From the beginning, we wanted to have a very diverse and collaborative process in the format. And this again shows you very clearly the simple idea of just submerging. This is just simply a cloth that we have submerged upside down into the waste water brine solution. And within 2 or 3 days, this fabric crystallizes and then starts to work in compression, not only in tension, but starts to become an architecture itself. And we thought, okay, maybe we can present that in Venice as a new structure. But then we soon realized that we are not solving the problem of concrete. This is, again, a very nostalgic, cute project that you can build from it maybe temporary shelters like bus stops or emergency housing or shelters, but it is not an architecture that is insoluble. This is a soluble architecture, means that this will absorb, as you can see here, it can absorb humidity, it can react to water and rain, and with time, similar to Siwa, it will collapse. It will not withstand the modern requirements of today, which are, the requirement of speed and scale, everything that is necessary to make sure that it can withstand the test of time. So then we started looking into further deeper into the research and trying to find more an insoluble crystal rather than a soluble crystal to produce this cement or this concrete, and then we were able to build structures actually that were more inspired from the sabkhas themselves by the help of the university labs that we started collaborating with. So what we did is we did a partnership with NYU Abu Dhabi, the AUS, the American University of Sharjah, and the University of Tokyo, and we used their biochemistry and chemistry labs actually to look at the material in more depth than just innocent architects playing with water and salt. I mean, the residual brine of desalination water in their office, but taking it into a more real chemistry and chemistry laboratory that looks into the minerals themselves and the crystallization process in a real lab space. And as you can see here, we started analyzing these crystals, and then we understood that the material that works as a binder in replacing lime that could help solve the problem of CO2 emission is a magnesium oxide. And this is also a mineral that is found in the desalination residual brine that we could extract. So we started extracting these MgO minerals from the residual brine of water and using that in our new cement casting, if you can say, and creating these new architectural prototypes. And here we are taking it actually to a much larger scale where we are studying much bigger modules. Actually, this kind of a sneak peek, but we will build a prototype in Venice that is about 8 meters long and 6 meters wide with a height of 3 meters that is built from this MgO cement that's cast into sand. Again, why are we casting into sand? Because we don't want to produce waste of shuttering, etc. But it could be cast in modern ways of like modern architecture. But the interesting process of this architecture is that this architecture, you cannot produce a plan, a section, and very accurate drawings that you send to the contractor to build the same as the desire of the architect or the strong will of the architect. But actually, you send a system and the process to the contractor or the builder, and he will then understand the system and recreate it in his own understanding. So then again, you will have cultural and contextual sensitivities feeding into the system itself rather than following the typical modern way of building. And it's a more collaborative process, I think, that is necessary to come back into architecture in the 21st century. So I'll show a small video, actually. It's a teaser that we produced for the Venice Biennale. Well, this is, it's just a teaser. It doesn't sell off the project because, we want people to stay tuned until until the opening, hopefully in May 2021, and you can understand more the prototype and the space that we will be creating for Venice Architectural Biennale next year. So that actually sums up the first part of the presentation, which is mainly on the latest research that we've been doing and our focus on really finding a true solution and a true answer to climate change and combating that and carrying responsibility as architects and designers in the 21st century. And I refuse to believe, as Jack wrote to David Chipperfield, that the architect can do nothing, and that is something that I cannot agree to in any way or format, and have to believe that we are as responsible as any other individual, be it politics or economists or etc., in actually proposing real solutions to the climate change and social inequality. So that's first part of the presentation. I'll go through. I know we are pressed with time.
Well, if you don't mind, if I interject and ask you a question regarding,
yes,
before
please.
we close on this topic.
Yes.
Given the experience that you have been subjected so far in that particular track, how much of a limb have you were able to deviate from your expertise as an architect to engage in that research for you to meet the responsibility of the ethical responsibility of an architect, as you started the lecture with?
Well, I'm a practicing architect too, so I'm not only an academic. I'm not an academic in a way. And your question is spot on in a way, because I still struggle, because this is. I was having a conversation earlier today with a friend of mine, and I say, it'll be great if at some point this research can really coincide with my practice, you know, and really reach that will be a great moment in my life where I can really adapt these proposals in the architecture I am producing today as a practicing architect. Because again, you know, why concrete, why cement is successful is because a very simple fact is that it's cheap, it's fast to build with, and you know, it's scalable. You can build Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, is built with concrete, with cement. So unless you find a material that really matches these criteria, it is impossible for the industry or any developer to adopt it, or any client to adopt it, unless, you know, very benevolent small scale projects, which again will not produce any change. And this is, you know, this is the dilemma where I have to, you know, accept I have to accept the fact that today, as a practicing architect, I still use cement in many of my projects, but I am aware of its problems and trying to find a solution to that, hoping that in the next 10, 15 years, this will be different.
Yes, but at the end of the day, would you, I mean, looking back at the education of an architect, do you believe, given the challenges that we have in the modern world and our world and life, that education needs to deviate from its tradition, so to speak?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, that's very, very true. I mean, I think the, you know, architecture industry as a whole has to change. And this is, you know, what is the role of the architect today? I mean, this is a very interesting question that I've been discussing with the curators of actually Korea and Italy and other countries for the Venice Biennale, in a small group, trying to find a new manifesto for architecture in the 21st century. And it's very true. I mean, what is the role of the architect today? Who is the architect? And there has to be a change in the education process and in the system, because I mean, I believe the previous education would give the same answer that Herzog gave David, where he takes away all his responsibility and says, you know, the architect is not responsible. The architect is a designer. He's, you know, he's someone who produces space, but, you know, he's not more responsible than that. You know, I hate to use that an example, but when Zaha Hadid, may God bless her soul, I mean, I respect her very much, but when she was asked, you know, regarding the inequality of the laborers on sites and camps, she responded by saying, this is not my problem as an architect, right? And is that acceptable for a 21st century architect to have that answer? I mean, you know, today in my drawing for most projects that we submit, in the submittal process, in the tender documents, we make sure that the workers have a table to eat all 3 meals on. That's simple, and that all 3 meals will be provided and are up to standard, and their accommodation is inspected by a third-party member that is appointed by the client and the contractor jointly. So, I mean, there's a lot that the architect can do. He is, you know, he's the maestro of all this system. But but also I think the modern architect stepped out of that image.
Indeed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'll continue. I think you can still see my slides.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So actually, I'll move to another project, Heidi 3 in Dubai Design District. So in this project, the client came and said, actually, they wanted to build a cultural exchange space before the design district is built, and they wanted to build something temporary for a few years that could be dismantled later. So in this case, we thought, okay, maybe the shipping container could be the new module, you know, the new sustainable module in building an architecture that is built from recycling modules from the industry itself. So the site is actually located on a lagoon, and that was a water body in Dubai, and that was later actually filled up with soil. So we started with the concept of thinking how, you know, it's a very harsh environment. It's quite open to the desert around it before the Dubai Design District was built. So it was important for us to be introverted and to protect that and create this synthesis that I spoke about between architecture and landscape, because I don't see a difference between the two trades. And this is, again, if you ask me about the education, I think architecture and landscape should be one academic course and not two different academic disciplines, because they go hand in hand. And it is necessary for us to produce environments that are in synthesis with one another, rather than with clear boundaries and with clear delineations. So this shows, again, the diagram of relationship rather than a diagram of form, and our desire of wanting to create a 50% landscape and a 50% architecture for that activity. Also, you know, we needed to ventilate these courtyards because it was introverted. So we learned from vernacular architecture of the Barjil, or the wind tower, and we converted actually some of the 40-foot containers into wind towers that were placed in the project. So it's pure. This project was built using 84 40-foot high cube containers with no additional steel reinforcement. You can see here, it's actually the containers as they are. It was built actually in about a period of 8 months, and it was supposed to stay up for 2 years, but it's still standing today. I mean, it's been up for 4 years, I believe, already, and still functioning and standing. And that for me is also, you know, a new way of perceiving architecture, using a module like a shipping container to produce space. And these modules, these containers are all recycled. None of them were brand new, so they were bought off. And Dubai is, you know, a huge port city, so there's a lot of containers just lying around. So why not use them? And if we are able to use them in a very sustainable way and still create beautiful environment, this is the way that I think we should be thinking going forward. This is a model. We're very pressed with time. We still have, I think, 10. I'll talk about Al Warqa Mosque, then maybe we can have some Q&A. So I'll go through Al Warqa Mosque really quick also. So Al Warqa Mosque is, you know, is a mosque that was built in a community in Dubai, not central, in Al Warqa, and that was my first site visit with the client. It was, at that time, there was no roads actually in the site. It was quite a desert site, and we had to take that into context. So we started thinking about the importance of keeping the Arabic urban fabric because of the sense of community it creates. You know, this intimacy is very important rather than iconic gestures, but intimate gestures is very important. So we looked at different mosque typologies and started questioning that. You know, you have the Arab hypostyle, the Persian, the Indian 3-dome, and the Turkish central dome, and we really wanted to go back to the Arab hypostyle typology and re-question that also in creating the new mosque space, to create a space that is very communal rather than iconic in a way also. So we actually also used we designed the rewalk that wraps around all the haram space using the parabolic arch. Again, you know, the arch was a form for construction, because in the past, before cement was in place, so building with, if you wanted to create bigger openings in the facade, you had to adopt arches. But today, if you're building with cement, this building is actually built with cement, then, you know, the arch doesn't need to be there. It just becomes a symbol. So we said, why not then reinterpret the arch, let's say, reinterpret the arch into something that is playful and inviting on the facade, and more relevant to our time. So we proposed 5 different parabolic sizes that kind of invite people from all different directions into the rewalk, and then from the rewalk into the sahan, and from the sahan into the haram space. So it's kind of this simple flow from the out to the in, and the mosque has no boundary wall. So it's again open to the community, it's inviting, and it relates to sunlight, which again is my interest in natural phenomena. Sunlight is again an asset. I think it is, the sunlight is a material. So in the GCC, it's so abundant that we have to think and work with sunlight. So then, you know, even constructing panels, patterns and 3D reliefs, we use the sun to create these different gestures, and also to create and produce the space within the building. I want to show you the interior. So the whole haram space is actually designed as a skylight that brings in the sun from all 4 directions, from north, east, south, and west. And these are very accurately studied in our office. I mean, these are physical models that we produce and can mimic the sun on June 21 at 9 a.m. or December 21 at 9 a.m. and see how the sunlight is actually reacting within the space because of technology. So we can simulate these things and then create the desired space. So this is actually a photo of the actual built mosque, and the picture you see has 0 artificial light. So again, this I believe is an important way of thinking of sustainability and using the natural assets of the environment to produce architecture and space without relying on artificial lighting, and which again requires the energy and the fossil fuel consumption. And it creates a very comforting space also, rather than the use of artificial light, which creates a less comforting space. And the space is very dynamic. I mean, the movement of the sun is very poetic. Every day is different. There's no day similar to another day because the sun is always at a different angle. And even if you see, the corners are curved so that there's no clear shadow. So the sun seamlessly flows within the space, creating, you know, the environment that we wish to create. Here you can see artificial lighting in the dome, and that was actually an added part to the building at the end because the municipality refused the idea of having a mosque without a dome. Today they do accept it. We are building another mosque today without the dome, but this was a conversation that we started with them 5 years ago in trying to re-question the typologies and re-question the elements that produced architecture and what is their relevance today in the 21st century. You know, again, a dome was something that is a result of construction techniques that later became a symbol in mosques or churches. But today, do we have to still keep these symbols in the same formats, or can we re-question them in different formats? This is another mosque that we designed in Dubai, which we called the Mosque of Light, in which we didn't do a dome, but actually reinterpreted the dome with these arches within the space that reflect light through different ways. And then the dome itself becomes, or the reflection of natural light within the space creates that dome effect that I think becomes the symbol of heaven within a mosque atmosphere. And here you can see the rendering of the shuruq time, dhuhr time, asr time, maghrib time. And that, you know, creates a different space every single time of the day. I will stop here because I think we have a lot more, but we don't have time.
Absolutely, we're getting close to the 1 hour. I mean, it will be 6. And let me check what questions we have. Maybe.
Yes.
We have maybe one I will read for you, and which says, I don't know if you can see them, but it says, for you, how architecture, one of our students actually, for you, how architecture will confront the challenges surrounding the world and Lebanon specifically?
Architectural challenges surrounding the world and Lebanon specifically. I would like to know what they mean by Lebanon specifically. I mean, the architectural challenges to the world is very obvious. I mean, as I said in the beginning, that we expect to add plus 2.1 billion people to this planet by 2050. So if we don't re-question our materials, our ways of thinking, and we cannot continue to use and do what we have been doing in the past, because we can see through science and data today where they have put us today. True. So then a fundamental change is necessary. In Lebanon specifically, I mean, I think it's the same. I mean, the world is all producing architecture in the same way. It is no longer, I think, very remote countries maybe in the world, or not countries, but even regions within countries that still produce their own architecture. But other than that, I think architecture has been synthesized by the construction industry into very standard ways of producing it.
Well, before we just leave, I'm very curious.
Yes.
Since you have showed the two mosques,
yes.
There are always intrinsic polemic in the design of the interior of the mosque between the mihrab and the minbar. How did you manage that polemic, or the tension between the two?
Yes, I mean, I think my interest is actually re-questioning the elements that create a mosque, and it's very important, the mihrab, the minbar, the minarets, the riwaq, the sahan, the haram. These are all the elements that create a mosque and the experience of the mosque, or the architecture of the mosque. And then re-questioning each and every element is very important. You see, in Al-Warqa Mosque also, the minaret sits in the sahan, and the sahan is actually open to the haram through through these colonnade that opens up to that actually takes you into the haram space, and there's kind of this fluidity between all these elements. Then the mihrab, the mihrab and the minbar, I believe I think I want natural light, and I want natural phenomena to create the atmosphere rather than physical architecture. If that's clear as an answer, I hope it's clear. It's where you're kind of sculpting light rather than sculpting objects.
Yeah, I see that, but but at the end of the day, you have the whoever who's leading the congregation and giving the ceremony. Where would that sheikh would stand, for instance, in the mosque, addressing the public?
In the mihrab.
And the mihrab, I see. Okay.
Yes, yeah. Okay. They stand in the mihrab. So the minbar is not separated from the mihrab. Yeah, okay. I wish I had the photo of the minbars located, because there is if you go online, you Google Al-Warqa Mosque, you'll find a lot of pictures. You will see this photo was before the minbar was built, but the minbar is always located inside the mihrab itself. So
you have the object of the member. It's not only the imam standing in there. You have the object present as well. Yeah.
yes, but the object is second. It's not
Yes.
the object. I mean,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is I'm trying to say. It's more about the atmosphere of the light, etc. And then the object just blends into the space, the place where the imam stands, or actually he sits on a chair and speaks through a microphone. And then he will step down and he has the space to pray, leading the congregation, of course.
Okay. Good. It's an interesting solution, mind you. The dilution of that type inside the mosque. It has. I mean, it's always. It bugs me always how this is being addressed, because it's never successfully done.
Yes, and it will usually go from into the over the carpet, the first 2 rows of the carpet, or first 3 rows of the carpet, and will break the row, right? But again, this is because they want the minbar to be a very strong element within the haram space, rather than a secondary element. But if you look at the mosque typology in pre-modern days, yeah, it was very, it wasn't that much of an important object to be celebrated. Let me say, yes.
Well, thank you for your answer.
You're most welcome. I mean,
well, we're not having any more questions actually from the audience, unfortunately. Maybe we just have to thank you so much for the beautiful, interesting insight, and there's so many questions for us as within the academia. By the way, there are a lot of directions maybe to on 2 fronts. You were talking about the importance of the sustainability in terms of the material and understanding of the impact, let's say. As well, you were talking about this combination between the importance of the landscape and the association of it as a field within the realm or within the discipline itself as we study it, within the schools, right? Thank you so much for the beautiful lecture on all fronts, by the way. Thank you so much. I'm speaking on my behalf, and I think on behalf of everyone.
Yes.
Dean, would you like to?
Thank you. No, thank you very much. We've been honored to have you, Wael, at ARCHIDES. Thank you very much for having us.
I have one question. Do you think I have to read it? I received it on my WhatsApp.
Go ahead.
Where does future Vernacular stand in relationship to zero waste recycled materials approach? In other words, if using industrial waste solely is considered efficient at some point, then how efficient is it regarding minimizing the landfill footprint, solid waste?
Well, that's, I'm not sure if I understand the question very well, but I'll answer it from where how I see it. I mean, again, it's acknowledging if there will be waste or there is no waste. But again, it's important to be a realist in many ways. That is what I believe in. In today, you cannot tell a government don't desalinate when you are building a population and a new country where only it is capable of surviving through the desalination process. So then desalination becomes something inevitable that you have to accept in that process. Then how do you deal and treat the byproduct of that process is what we have to look into, and accepting that these byproducts are inevitable in a way. And the same with so many other industries. I mean, being a realist is very important, rather than being someone who is quite, in a way nostalgic, where you think that desalination should not happen in the first place, but this is something that is not going to happen. We know that. So better to deal with the situation in a very proactive way rather than not finding a solution for it. I'm not sure if that is the correct understanding of the question. My correct understanding.
Yeah, I guess it was. So I think, I mean, I from what I understood as well, maybe. But we're having more questions. I don't know if we're gonna go through them all, but shall we go through, or we stop? Dean, how would you propose? Or Wael, how much are you available still with us?
If you have questions, it's fine with me. I'm here. I have time.
There's a question, and I'm really skipping. Is, in your opinion, can the artificial intelligence and machine learning help in material manufacturing and using, so the materials can adapt with the future environmental changes?
Yes, I believe, of course. I mean, again, technology is something that we should benefit from in order to produce architecture and to produce materials for architecture, and that is something that is key in our research. I mean, it is only through the technology of the laboratories at NYU Abu Dhabi that we were able to extract the MgO from the residual brine of B-cell in order to create that new material that we are proposing. I am not an expert in that field, but I don't know how much artificial intelligence can be able to read this material and readapt it in different ways, but probably that is something that could be looked into and could be interesting. I mean, I know there are some architects today practicing that look at not artificial intelligence, but look at microorganisms and things like that in creating new materials and in producing architecture that is very sustainable.
A different question relating to the mosque, Al-Warqa, I guess. The ceiling height of the mosque does not contradict the notion of vernacular, even if it was for natural light purposes. Maybe it does not. However, I would like to know how you thought about it.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The ceiling height of the mosque does not contradict the notion of vernacular. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she's talking, they're talking about the scale, maybe, or the height. I don't know, maybe so.
But why would it contradict the notion of vernacular? That's where I didn't understand it, maybe.
Yeah, same here, even if it was for natural light purposes.
Yeah.
It does not get any clearer.
I mean, mosque is not, this is built from cement, this is not built, but I think the vernacular in the Al-Warqa mosque is the natural light. That is the vernacular material of the GCC and the UAE. That's what I was trying to say. And it is always the physical. I mean, the vernacular can be the metaphysical. I mean, it can be looking at light, wind phenomena, things like that, that become your vernacular tools or elements to produce the architecture that is very contextual in a way. And, you know, this is again, you know, the question between the pre-modern, the modern architecture and the 21st century kind of re-questioning how do you perceive certain elements in creating architecture or producing space.
Yeah. Could a farmer be a great architect?
Yeah, I mean, Tadao Ando was a boxer. Right.
Maybe they're linking it to their relationship with the land, with the earth. Maybe they're trying to associate it further. Anyway.
I mean, an architect, you know, what I'm trying to say, I mean, an architect does not necessarily need to be formally trained as an architect. I don't believe in that. And Tadao Ando is a perfect example. I mean, he was really a boxer, he's, you know, and then he turned out to be an amazing architect. And his perception of space is.
Yep. So I guess maybe thank you. We abused of your generosity as well. Thank you, Wael. Thank you so much.
You're most. No, thank you, Hala. Thanks, Dean Abed, for having me, and Azam University. And I wish all your students the best of luck with their education. I know it's very difficult during COVID and online and stuff, where But
بالعكس أنا بدي لك thank you for having us لأن at the end of the day it's online and you have يعني hosted us in your office, so thank you.
yeah, you're more than welcome. You're more than
All right, ciao. Yeah, bye bye.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.